Why your mother is the reason you've been in bad relationships. Mommy issues 101. So, when I started dating, and it was specifically when I left home for varsity, I got in the habit of falling for guys that are emotionally unavailable, guys that treated me badly in terms of not really respecting my time, not really giving me the healthy amount of attention that is necessary in a relationship. And I obviously just jumped to having daddy issues. I was raised by a single mother. My dad has never been present in my life, and I never had a father figure to replace that. So I just guessed that it must be daddy issues. It must be because I never had a father figure, so that's why I fall for bad guys. To my surprise, it's more because I have mommy issues. My mother, who was present, I have mommy issues more than daddy issues. And now that I look back at my dating history, I realize that my mother is the reason that I've fallen for bad guys. And I don't know, maybe one day I will really realize and unpack how my father's absence in my life has also affected me. Because I do think that I generally don't trust men. I don't trust men. I don't know how to relate to men. I just don't know how to engage with men. And I think that's part of the reason that my father was not around. So I don't really know how that's supposed to look like. And even any other man that was ever present in my life, whether that be a relative or someone from church, they really didn't leave a good mark. Not necessarily that they were bad people, but they just didn't have that much of an impact in my life. Whereas my mother, who obviously raised me on her own, had so much impact in my life. Raised by a single woman who fed us as her children, clothed us, put a roof over our heads. My mother did all the necessary things when it comes to physically taking care of a child. She did that. But what my mother failed to do was genuinely love us, genuinely be there emotionally for us, and be supportive and really see us. I think when you get at the core of really our human experience, we long to be seen. We long for someone to really see you, to really know you, to value you, to respect you. We want to know that we matter. And in as much as my mother has done all the physical things, feeding us, taking care of us, taking us to school, I never really felt like I mattered. And it's so crazy because my mother's world has been centered around us. There were times where my mother has shared how hard things would get in her life. And at that time, we were still even just kids. And she would say we were the only reason that she kept going and kept trying. And I can testify to that because my mother did anything possible to make sure we were fed, to make sure we had enough of what we needed. We might not have had the most expensive things, but we had clothes. We might not have ate the most fancy food or whatnot or eat out, but we had food. And so it just it's such a contradiction. It's such, what's the word for it? It's such a contrast to see this woman who actually centered her life and strived in life for her children because she wanted to make sure that we had food on the table, take care of us. But at the same time, on the other side, she withheld her emotional availability to us. It's still really confusing to me, in as much as I see it, because I look back and I see that my mother was just never really emotionally there for me. And this is the mother who always came back home to us. My mother didn't leave us alone in the house and be somewhere else. My mother was physically fully present, always came back home to us, cooked us a meal. She was there. But emotionally, I never felt seen by my mother. I never felt like I could rely on her. It was more of the other way around, where she felt like she could rely on me. Where we as her children, and especially me as the eldest daughter, I became her therapist. I became her support system. I became her emotional support system. And she wasn't there for me in that capacity. And so, in all my discovery and realizing how my mother has lacked in the most crucial way, being there for me emotionally, just simply being there, I still have to acknowledge that this is the mother who raised me and made sure that I was fed and made sure that I had clothes on my back and had a roof on my head. Because I cannot take that away from her. She always made sure, even when I went to varsity and I got funding, but it couldn't cover everything, she was the one sending me money for food. She was the one sending me money for rent. So I cannot take that away from her. And without her, I probably wouldn't have gone to varsity. I probably maybe wouldn't have gotten a chance to go to the specific schools that I went to, especially when I changed schools in high school and went to a multiracial school. That was all my mother. So this is why it's such an emotional confusion to not understand how my mother can physically be there and do all the necessary things as a parent should, but still just not be emotionally there and feel so disconnected from my mother emotionally. And so, yeah, I have big time mommy issues. So I go to varsity, I start dating, and I fall for, I remember this guy was the one guy that I just loved for such a long time because I actually knew him from high school. And then when I went to varsity, we started connecting because he was also that side where I was studying. And he was the most emotionally unavailable guy. And he was also the most unattracted to me guy. I don't know how to phrase that, but he was really not into me. Do you know that movie that's called He's Just Not That Into You? Honestly, that guy was just not into me. But I was infatuated. Is it infatuated? I just, it wasn't love, but somehow I wanted it to be love. I was so desperate for his attention. I was so desperate for his love that I pushed it under the rug, the fact that he was just not emotionally available and that he showed up in my life whenever and then, would disappear, that he wouldn't give me attention, that he was just not there. And that guy was the first guy that actually just started a series for me of dating emotionally unavailable guys. And somehow for me, I think that was attractive in the most absurd and foolish way. I think maybe that was the attractive thing for me, in as much as it would hurt me that this guy that I like so much is not there for me, is not giving me all the attention. But at the same time, I kept being attracted to those guys because what was normal in my home was people not being emotionally there for me, and specifically my mother. And so when I started dating, somehow I leaned or attracted more of that. And also with the guys not being emotionally unavailable on my side, I do think I wanted more attention than what was necessary in a relationship. I craved attention. I've mentioned this in another episode where I was talking about my sister and how I see that she also really craves attention, and sometimes she'll do certain things just to get attention, whether it be she's sick and now she's just dragging it out so that she gets attention, or she's just being way too bubbly to get attention, or making jokes, or fooling around. And I get where that comes from. And I think for me, it manifested in a different way because what we lack is the fact that our mother never paid attention to us in the way that she should have. Because again, I think it's because my mother didn't get that growing up. But also at the same time, it's almost like she didn't want to give it to us. It's more than the fact that she probably doesn't know how, to give love to her children because she never got it when she grew up. It's also really tied with, I feel like my mother didn't really want to give us that. In another episode, I mentioned how I think she thinks by maybe loving us too much or giving us attention, she will make, excuse me, I think she thinks she will make us feel too good about ourselves. And so she intentionally withholds these things so that, I don't know, we don't get too big for our shoes. It's twisted, it's messed up, but honestly, I genuinely believe that's the reason. That she doesn't want to inflate us for some reason, because in her mind, she thinks that, like giving us full attention and fully loving us and fully being there for us, that somehow that's gonna make us think we are all that, and we shouldn't think that, I guess. But what she doesn't realize is how much of a void and emptiness she has left in us that we try to fill it in other ways. My sister has her own tactics to get attention because she's trying to fill that void. For me, it was dating, trying to get all the attention from guys, way more than was necessary, because I wanted to fill the emptiness inside of me. That wasn't a daddy issue. That was a mommy issue. That the mother who was actually present, that the parent who actually stayed and raised me, and kudos to her, because I'm not going to give any credit to my father because he walked out. This doesn't mean I'm letting my father off the hook, because he's obviously the bad dude. He walked out, didn't even try. My mother was there. She stayed. She was present. But at the same time, I have issues because of her. And so I dated emotionally unavailable guys because I believe that was the norm for me, to not have someone really be there for me, to not have someone really see me. And so that is what I was attracted to. Because in some twisted way, I think it seemed weird to me when a guy was just fully there for me and fully sees me. You know how sometimes we as girls, we often think of good guys, like the nice guys, or the guy who just gave you full attention, how we think like, ugh, they just talk, so it's too much. And sometimes that's true. Okay, I do believe there is something as loving someone too much and and overdoing it. But at the same time, sometimes the reasons we are not attracted to those two good guys or two nice guys, it's because that's not what we're used to. I'm not used to someone really being that kind to me. And it's sad to really think about it like that. But if you really, really think about it, when I think about it, I realize that if a guy was paying too much attention to me and was just really there, that didn't seem normal to me. Because I was raised by a mother. I was raised in a family where emotionally we didn't really connect. We were not really vulnerable and open with each other. And so when I now meet a guy who's like that, it just seems off for me, and I don't want to deal with that. And so I go for the cocky guys who just seem out of my reach, who I think they're out of my league, and I put them in a pedestal because I think they're so great and I just should fight for their attention. I should fight for their love. I should try to make them see me, because that is what I did even as a child. I was trying and fighting to get my mother to see me. I was a good girl because I was trying to get my mother to see me. So that's the same thing I did when I started dating. Mommy issue, not a daddy issue. And also, I had a need for validation from men. Again, this comes from my mother. I've always wanted my mother to validate me. I look back at my childhood and I look back at all the things that I would do, even just from me coming back from school straight to home, doing my chores correctly, overdoing even my chores. And when you like really cleaning and you touch other places that you don't normally touch, because I just wanted to impress my mother and I wanted her to validate me. And my mother's way of keeping you on this need for validation was actually not validating you. So you always just wanted more. So that was the same thing, even with the guys that I dated. When I felt like I wasn't validated, I wasn't seen, I wasn't complimented, I just wanted more of that. So instead of just walking away and realizing, hey, I'm not appreciated here, I'm not validated. And this is not even to say like 100% of validation should come from other people. I'm now learning that I need to learn to validate myself. But at the same time, I recognize the fact that you can't always be everything to yourself. So also this lie that is going around in this new age time where you are more than enough, all you need is yourself. I don't believe in that. I believe that we need a type of community around us. We need friends. Doesn't mean it has to be a large circle. Doesn't mean you need many friends. But I do believe that you need people around you, sometimes to give you a confidence boost, sometimes to validate you. You cannot always be 100% of everything to yourself. Otherwise, like, why are we even all in this world? Like, one man was enough. Adam was enough. Like, God shouldn't have even created Eve, because the Bible says God looked at Adam and was like, it's not good for a man to be alone. And I like Michael Todd's interpretation of that word, that we have to look at it beyond just a male being alone, that God thought, oh, you need a female, which is a helper according to the Bible. But we also have to broaden it to the sense that Adam as a male human being was alone in the literal sense and needed companionship. And so for us, companionship can be friendship, can be relatives, can be a romantic relationship. And so I recognize now that I needed more validation than what I should have required from one human being, from a man, or even from my own mother. But from my own mother, it was rooted from the fact that she has never seen me in the first place, and I was just a child. When you are still growing up, you need to be taught these things. You need to be taught how to validate yourself. At the same time, you need the validation of loved ones. So these things are both necessary. I'm not on this wavelength of saying I am more than enough. I don't need anybody. I don't need no man. I need people in my life. And I'm speaking from a point where I currently don't even have friends. Much of my relatives, we don't really talk. I need people in my life. And I'm somewhat of a loner. I'm an introvert. It's very hard for me to socialize. I don't really enjoy it. But I see the need for other people in my life. So I'm not going to say I'm enough for myself, but I also have to learn to validate myself so that I don't burden other people to constantly be my validation. And so that's what I needed from men when I dated. I needed so much validation, more than I should have needed, more than any human being would be able to give, because when you are so empty, you are essentially just asking this person to fill you up from the bottom to the brim. And you're asking a lot from that person. But because this is something I didn't even get from home, where my mother withheld, for example, like me saying that I would come back home, do my chores, blah, 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 to impress my mother. And she would intentionally not say anything about that, and act like, oh yeah, this is just what you were supposed to do. I'm talking about, listen, as a child, when you do your chores, like, okay, maybe I just have to wash dishes and that's it. But for me, I would go the extra mile, maybe just clean the whole fridge. And at that time, like, some other things around the house, it's just for your mother. You're like, when she gets in a mood and she wants to do like her spring cleaning, she will do all of that. But for me, I would try to do all these things because I was trying to impress her. And she would act like it's just nothing. Or even if she mentions it, it would be like, oh, but it's not really a big deal. And so by her withholding the validation that I needed, withholding the approval or being seen that I needed, it made me need more somehow. And that was the same mentality that I had when I started dating, that I always craved more from guys. I craved more. And if someone didn't really give me validation or see me, somehow that kept me wanting more, because I'm so used to fighting for my mother's attention and affection and to be seen by her. It came natural for me when I started dating to fight for a guy's love, to fight to be seen. And so for me, it actually, them, a guy not seeing me or really validating me or really being there for me, somehow that kept me around in the relationship, because it just meant I had something to fight for. And even though I never won when I fought for my mother's love, I don't really even know what was going on in my mind, thinking that maybe one day then he'll love me. And then what? I don't understand. Also, another thing that I was fishing in relationships was really compliments. I wanted someone to praise me, to compliment me, tell me I'm beautiful, tell me I'm smart, tell me I'm great, tell me I'm talented. I was really fishing for that because, again, I didn't get it from my mother. That is something she withheld. That is something she didn't freely give. My mother would compliment my brother and my sister on their talents, and I was one of those kids who just didn't know what I was talented in. And my mother withheld any from, like, I was good academically, but she acted that like that wasn't a big deal. And so instead she would just praise my brother and my sister more on their gifts, instead of maybe even just complimenting me for like my academic record. And so I was dating, and I like, how is it, Haley? I don't know. But she was saying that sometimes when we are dating, when we are dating someone that we think is out of our league, or we are dating someone that intimidates us and you feel like you constantly have to fight for their love or approval, we do this thing where we are pocketing compliments. It's like whenever they say something good, you get a hit, like when you take drugs or something and you just get this hit and you pocket it, like, oh, I got another compliment. And maybe they might not compliment you for a while, but when they do say something, it's like you collecting these compliments because it's an achievement. Because to be complimented by this person feels like an achievement instead of something normal that should be happening within the relationship. And that was the same thing with my mother. When she did compliment me on something or praise me on something, it's like I was just pocketing these compliments. I was collecting them because they were so rare and far in between. So I just had to collect them, and they would make me feel good for a time being, and then I would just need another dose to keep me going. And so I would work towards another compliment and another praise. And that is not how a relationship should be. Being complimented in a relationship, praising each other, validating each other, it shouldn't feel like it is an achievement. It should be standard. It should be a mutual way that we treat each other when we are in a relationship. And so for me, the guys that I would date, I was just pocketing these compliments. I would feel so good about myself when a guy said maybe I'm beautiful and said that I'm intelligent. And because these guys, they knew, because somebody sees when you are putting them in a pedestal and you feel like you are less than. So they knew that them saying these things was big for me. Just like my mother knew that whenever she gave those compliments out or praised me on something, it would be a big deal to me because it wasn't something that I was used to. And also because of my own mother, of the mommy issues that I have, I accepted bad treatment, such as not being respected or being ghosted, or a guy walking in and out of my life as they pleased, because again, this was just normal for me. One of the emotional ways that a narcissistic mother will abuse you is by giving you the silent treatment, because they are not mature enough to speak about what's going on, but instead they're gonna punish you by giving you the silent treatment. And my mother is the master of this. And so when I also started dating, I tolerated that behavior. Someone just ghosting me out of nowhere, or blue ticking me, not speaking to me for a while, walking in and out of my life, not really respecting my time, not really just respecting me as a person and thinking they can just do whatever. I tolerated that because, again, this was normal to me. I mean, my mother had done it to me. My mother would use the silent treatment instead of just having a conversation about what she was upset about or about what she didn't like. And she would usually give me the silent treatment when maybe I confronted her about something, or I told her I didn't like something, or I didn't agree with her on something. And then she would give me the silent treatment. And it was a way of punishing. And because at that time, I was still so uncomfortable with being in that place, I would end up being the one groveling back to her, just trying to chat her up, trying to, just to cheer her up when that wasn't my duty. One of the things that I'm learning from the podcast that I'm listening to about narcissists is that everybody is responsible for their emotions. So when someone gives you the silent treatment, they are actually just acting like a baby and not dealing with their own emotions, because whether someone upset you, made you angry or whatnot, you are still fully responsible for your own emotions and for the way that you react. And also choosing to have a conversation about it and then hearing what the other person says, whether they own up or they don't own up to it, or whether they apologize or don't apologize. But as a grown adult, you are responsible for your own emotions. And so by my mom giving me the silent treatment, I always felt obligated to make her feel better, even though I was not even in the wrong. But I felt like her emotions, her emotional well-being, somehow I felt like it was my responsibility. And so I would just be like sucking up to her, trying to make her feel good, trying to get her to talk to me. And this was just a power trip for her because she enjoyed that. Now I'm trying to get her to speak to me and it feels good to her because she has the upper hand. Now I'm the one groveling back to her. And so the same thing obviously happened when I started dating. I fell for those type of guys because, again, this was just a normal way of being in a relationship for me because of the way that my mother has treated me. So ultimately for me, dating was just a way to fill a void. I really wasn't dating for companionship or love, partnership, or even just really dating to marry. I'm so glad I didn't even marry any of those guys, because what a disaster it would have been. But it was just to fill a void, an emptiness that I had in me. And perhaps the absence of my father in my life had something to do with it, but also my mother really had a lot to do with it. Because as the present parent, the parent who stayed and took care of us, she really failed to be there for us in the way that truly mattered. Because really, what really, really matters, I've said this before, like whether you are living in a shack, a one-room house, or wherever, what really, really matters is that your mother loves you. Your parents, they love you and they're really there for you. And then one day you can even look back and laugh about the fact that, hey, we didn't really have much to eat, but I always felt my mother's love. I wish that is the story that I could say, that even in the hardest of times where we didn't really have much to eat or much to wear, but I always felt my mother's love. But that's not the story that I have. That's not the story that I can share because my mother constantly withheld her love, and I never knew it. I still don't know it. And now everything that she lacked to give me, I'm learning to give to myself. And I'm praying, I'm actually even praying about this, that God helps me to not think that everybody's the same like my mother, because I'm left in a place where I don't really let people in my emotional space, because I think they're going to hurt me. I think they're going to manipulate me, gaslight me, withhold their love from me, and not really see me or value me. And so I'm hoping and I'm praying that I get to meet people in my life who are intentional about loving someone, and I can love them back, and I can express the love that I would try to express my mother but was never reciprocated. And I could meet people who could meet me halfway and show love and not feel like showing love is a sign of weakness.